I'm Dr. Martin Carpenter, and this is the Heartache Connoisseur podcast. This is part 2 of 3 in our relationship series with Ian Kearns and Kate Bell, licensed marriage and family therapists. We continue our discussion on relationship patterns that are sometimes difficult and dysfunctional. We talk about some of the ways to change that can aid the growth of our relationships and improve intimacy. And we tell some funny and enlightening stories along the way. Thanks for listening.
And I was thinking, Marty, when you were talking about like these, the typical douchebag, talking to my girlfriends, it's like sometimes they almost consciously choose the douchebag.
Of course they do.
Because they're like, if I settle down with a guy in the khakis and a stable job, that means I'm moving on to a different part of my life.
Ooh, that's a good piece of insight.
Like I'm trying to hold on to my youth a little bit. I still want that excitement. I'm not ready to be done with that yet.
I don't want to admit that I'm
at that point where I should be moving on. So they they pick that typical douchebag because they're like, I know he's never going to invest in me. I'm never going to invest in him. And if I can go into it with the idea of this, like control over the emotion, control over the attachment, I'm not going to get hurt in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't there some research talking about how women are more attracted at certain points on their hormonal cycle to men with higher testosterone features?
Oh, yeah. Now, I remember a study where they let women sniff white T-shirts of men that they couldn't see. And at certain points in their cycle, when they're most fertile, I guess, they tend to choose the T-shirts with the smell of the men with the most masculine features, the most traditionally masculine features, square jaw and shoulders and whatever. I mean, that's nuts. I mean, there's so much at play here, and I think people don't realize, what I think is driving me is actually the tip of the iceberg. There's what I think is driving me. There's my subconscious, perhaps. There's, my heart's desire, my soul, my spirit. Oh, and there's also, like I said, a gajillion years of DNA built up that's pushing us forward. And that's why we have to take a look and decide, I think, what we're going to do, as opposed to just be tossed around by the wind, because we can make good decisions if we stop and think about it. We really can. And relationships are a great teacher, and they can help you become a healthier person much quicker than you would alone if you allow that process to happen. Don't you think it's been like wildly educational for you being in a relationship? I mean, what has it taught you about yourself trying to relate to someone and live under the same roof with them?
A lot of things. And the thing that I tell people a lot too is, they'll have these relationships that they see as failed relationships. And they'll say, the relationship failed. Why couldn't I make it work? And I think an important thing to say is, well, you did make it work. It worked for the amount of time that it worked for, and it's going to work for you afterwards. There's things in my first marriage that didn't work, and I try very hard in my second marriage to not let those things happen. There's a lot of disengagement. There's a lot of things like that, I would never let my current wife, hang out a lot with an ethics professor.
Well, that's or any professor for that matter.
Right. Mostly ethics.
Unless they had tenure, then that's a different story.
He wasn't tenured, of course. It just doesn't help my ego. But anyway.
Did banging a student help him get there? I don't know.
I don't think it did. He was at Kirkwood, so it wasn't even a real...
But that's the real beauty of these painful relationships, is that they do actually teach us things that allow us to finally get into a stable pattern with somebody. And I'll tell a little story. I mean, I'm engaged to be married now, and truthfully, my fiance and my ex-wife have a number of personality characteristics in common. Surprise, surprise. I would be attracted to that person, And we're laying there. This is an area that I faltered when in my youth, that I've finally gotten to where I can manage much better now. But that moment, it's the end of the day. It's 10:30 or 11 at night, and you got nothing left. At least I don't at that hour. And maybe they've been doing their thing, and kids and dinner and their work and stuff, and they miss connection, and I do too. But my emotional batteries are dead, and so there's kind of this desire for connection, and I don't have it. And then the other person might interpret that as a little bit of a slight or a rejection, and then I experience a little bit of frustration because I can't give them what they need, and B, they're interpreting my emotionally dead batteries as a personal rejection, which in my mind it isn't. And that right there is the tinder that has started many a fight at bedtime for me throughout the course of my life, that when I've engaged in it has kept me up till 3 a.m. explaining myself, ever madder and ever more sleep deprived. And the other night this happened, and I just was like, okay, she just moved over in the bed 1.5 feet, communicating to you that she's feeling distanced. You don't have anything left. You know what, Marty? Dig deep right now. Set your own agenda aside. Grab her, give her a hug, tell her you love her, tell her that you're sorry you're not your best self, but you're absolutely 100% committed to the relationship. And please don't take it personally. And tomorrow's a new day, and I'm with you, and I love you, honey. That never would have come out of my mouth in my 20s at all, ever.
Sure. And I think kind of touching on both of what you guys said is it's this idea that, even if the relationship wasn't quote unquote successful, it can still be successful if you take something from it. So what you learned from your past relationship was that, okay, I need to dig deep. I need to, in those moments, I need to dig deep, where before you might not have. That's what you took from that relationship to make it a successful one.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, get rid of that whole, if it's so magical, it's just going to work. It's no amount of magic is going to make it work. If you're both working 15-hour days and you come home and the other person, you start to get into that sort of snowball effect of, oh, I'm angry at her because she's not paying attention to me. She's not paying attention to me because I'm acting like I'm angry at her. And that way you just described, that digging deep and talking to them, that's the work that it takes to make it last and make it work, because sometimes you are going to get butthurt, I guess, is what they would say, when you feel rejected by your partner. And so being able to dig deep and learning that from those first relationships and taking that into a more mature relationship is fundamental.
But I think it takes being open to the idea that you're not perfect too. Like, we have a tendency to always blame it on the other person, because I'll talk to some of my girlfriends, and admittedly, one of them, her type is the typical douchebag. She keeps blaming it on, well, I just always date douchebags. Her type might really be douchebag. It's just that she's doing the same thing over and over and over with guy after guy after guy. It's not necessarily that it's always it might be in part, because some of the qualities that these guys possess that aren't helping things, but it's that she keeps doing the same things over and over and over.
Mm-hmm. What is it about, people don't stop to ask themselves, what is it about me that causes me to choose this over and over again? What am I getting out of this? Do I get anything out of the blaming process? Do I like the way it feels? Does being rejected by this person match with my view of myself in a way that feels right in a moment? Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If I don't respect myself, if I don't have self-love, self-worth, then when somebody treats me like a human being, it's confusing. And so you look for people who treat you like the way that you feel about yourself. And so then it all makes sense. Well, if I am a worthless piece of crap, then it would stand to reason that this person would cheat on me. They wouldn't return my text for 6 hours. They'd come home drunk. They might push me around a little. That all makes sense. Or that's what also, in addition, they might have had that sort of thing modeled for them growing up, and that's the pattern they know. They've never actually seen what a healthy relationship looks like. Gottman is kind of the marriage king, right? He's done all this research, and I remember reading a paper not too long ago, and it was like, half of marriages end in divorce, but the ones that stay married, only about a quarter of those are in a relationship that could be considered healthy by any psychological standard. And so there's so few relationships out there where people are actually in a reciprocal, loving, mutually respectful exchange with their partner. Even people that have maybe been married for 50 years, let's say. I've known a number of patients and stories where people get to the end of their life and they've been pillars in their community and married 50 years and all this, and they're like, by the way, Doc, I've been miserable for 50 years. I've just sucked it up and done what was expected of me, done the right thing, stayed married because that's just what you do, and that's what the Bible says, and no criticism on the idea of commitment at all. But there is a belief out there that just staying married is enough. If you're married, that's enough. You're done. Even if your soul is dead, her soul is dead, all the kids hate you secretly, and it's all a show. Like, well, at least we're married. At least in the eyes of the church, we're okay, or whatever it is.
That's
for them.
part of being an upstanding citizen too. Always been married for 50 years, and that I think in our culture there's something to be said for the idea that if you stay married for 50 years, then you're an upstanding guy, or does that make sense?
Yeah, it becomes another point of identity for you, right?
Yeah, like I think what was that thing you said? What are those called? Those weird little enclosed terrariums. Like you plant plants in these things and you seal them up, and they're supposed to work with just plants, and then there's like maybe an animal or a guppy and swimming around in the bottom, and the guppies reproduce and the plants eat the waste, and the energy input keeps the whole thing going, and I think people see marriage as being like that. You can close it up and you can forget about it because you've taken care of that part of your life, and that may work. But what I've found and I was telling Kate this, when you try to make these things more often than not, like the guppies die and then they start getting moldy and then that kills the plants, and then the whole thing, I've had it more than once, these things will just turn into a giant ball of mold in glass. And, obviously it's a failure unless you're trying to grow mold in glass, which very few people do. Sometimes it does work. Sometimes you get it going and it's perfect, but more often than not, it doesn't. And marriage is sort of like the difference between, people view it as that enclosed microcosm where it's just going to work. You get married, you're this dyad, you're together, everything's perfect, and you've got your needs met. And it's not like that. It's more like an outdoor garden, and you have to put a lot of work into it, and you have to go out and shoo the rabbits out and get rid of the tomato hornworms that are eating everything, and you have to. It takes work. And
and it has seasonal change. It changes over time. You have to reevaluate it and retool it. It needs flow. It needs oxygen. Sometimes it's warm and inviting, and sometimes it's cold. You don't want to be there, but it's worth something. It's worth something in all of its imperfection. That you kind of embrace it and you say, well, you finally get to a place where if you've been around people, where your expectations get put in line, where you realize what this person is not able to meet every single one of my needs. I have got to be able to find my own life, my own humanity, my own sense of purpose and meaning, and then share it with someone who also has their own life, their own sense of purpose, their own meaning. And that's what makes a healthy interplay between two people. I sometimes I wish I had sock puppets. I'm going to look at the camera, but people, they do this. This is enmeshment. We're sucking the life out of each other, this symbiotic parasitosis, vampire-like relationship where it's all about what do I get out of this thing. And this evermore, we just consume each other until it's so painful that we have to just tear ourselves apart, That's ugly. This, though, is sort of this, well, hi there, how was your day? It was pretty good. How's that thing? I'm really supportive of you in this capacity. And, you wander off and you do your thing and you come back together and you're walking this path together side by side through life, as opposed to just ramming into each other, making the relationship itself the entire purpose of your existence and such.
Sure, and it's so interesting, Marty, when you look at couples where you have the one who wants that vampiric suck the life out of you sort of relationship. It's almost like they're threatened if their partner isn't the same person that entered the relationship into them.
You're not allowed to change in those settings.
No, because then it's almost like they take it as a testament to, what am I doing wrong? You're growing distant. Why aren't you the same person? Why isn't our relationship the same way that it was? I hear that so often. Mm-hmm. Our relationship isn't the way that it used to be, but it shouldn't be.
Right. That's one of the most sad and difficult things for me as a provider, and often leaves me befuddled in terms of what counsel to give somebody. Let's say you're a 50-year-old person and you've been married for let's say 25 years or something, and you did have a really good relationship and still do in a lot of ways, maybe for 15 years or something. And then over the last several years, one member of that relationship really begins to mature and grow in some new and different ways, and the other person does not. And what used to be a pretty functional system, imperfect but functional and worked, has now become very difficult for the person. I think perhaps even more difficult for the person who's growing or committed to that change, because they're now mature enough to know that their values are such. You don't just walk away from your commitments. You stay in there. You're patient with people. But let's say that, that guy let's say it's the woman who's growing, and that guy might go to the basement and drink 6 beers a night. Never enough to really get in trouble with the cops or get you to the doctor with liver failure. But there's just like he's smoldering down there, dying a slow death, and you're desperately trying to grow wings and become who you were kind of made to be, and they're dead weight. But what do you do? I mean, that's a really hard spot for people.
Right, because I think you're caught between feeling guilty about the other partner, feeling guilt because the relationship is changing, and you may outgrow that person if they're not willing to do some growth themselves or not allow you to grow. Right.
Well said. I mean, you outgrow the person or you outpace them in growth. And to what degree are you obligated to stick around in that circumstance? I mean, these are the ones where a lot of times the kids leave the house and somebody splits. They're just like, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm just simply, there's no purpose for this kind of a thing. And it's really hard to blame them. And I do believe that marriage is important and it's good for society and it's a fundamental building block of our culture. I really do believe that. I think our society would be better off if we had more committed, loving, healthy marital relationships with two-parent families. I just think that's pretty obvious to me. I mean, and that's no condemnation, as I too am a divorced person. But we have to decide to do it. We cannot expect it to just happen. You have to put energy into the system for it to flourish. There's really no other way. What do you think, Kate, about the idea of a season of sowing your wild oats? Do you think that's an important thing?
To me, yeah, only because I think that it's always the idea of what you don't know. We tend to romanticize it. We tend to make it think, oh God, what am I missing out on? What could I be doing? Mm-hmm. And unless you've gone out and seen what is out there, you've experienced a little bit of life, you've seen the other side.
What's reasonable?
I think that depends on the person.
Yeah?
I really do.
Well, I mean, there's certainly people I know that date and have sort of an average number of relationships and partners. And then there's people I know that have put up 3-digit numbers on the scoreboard. And they certainly know what's out there in terms of what they like and what their preferences are and stuff. But now it's almost as if they're jaded or they've gone too far with it. They're not irreparable. That's not my point. But there is an element of having used and abused the relationship drug so extensively that it's almost as if having a healthy relationship with relationships is very difficult now.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm going to throw something back at you, Marty. So I have a couple friends. I'm like, I don't know that a healthy relationship is what's the most suitable for them. Mm-hmm. Is that possible?
I think there's a lot of people, if I'm honest, who have no business being in relationships. If what they say they want is what they really want, which is I want to be happy in a relationship. Okay, well, it's not. You're just making each other miserable. Everybody you meet, you're doing the same thing to them, and vice versa. What if you just took a time out, did some therapy, read some books, went to India, hung out in an ashram or whatever, and get yourself squared away and then try this again, and maybe pick a different kind of partner on purpose. Just try, mix it up. Like I think people, they just get in a rut and they don't understand why other people won't do exactly what they want them to do. Right.
Well, and I think too, like what I see with some of my friends is it's like you don't even have a good relationship with yourself yet.
There you go. Right.
So start there and then figure it out. And maybe it is going to be, like you said, that season of sowing your wild oats. For some people, it might be a solid decade. For some people, it might be 1 year of trying the Tinder world. And you're like, okay, nope, I'm done.
And I treat a lot of Amish people too. And a lot of them are happy. And I don't think they're sowing a lot of oats, like the metaphorical kind. I think they're committed and they're in a very strict structure. And a lot of them, I'm not going to sit here and tell you they're not happy in their relationships. They seem very tender with one another, and they're accepting and they're patient and they love their kids together. And I don't think it's a show.
No.
I mean, I think there's a lot of things that work.
Well, what about the idea of novelty and how the overuse, or I don't want to say abuse, or even overuse because that pathologizes it, but whenever you engage a new relationship, or I guess in the context of like pornography use, each new, the people, the serial partner havers may have gone to the point where they require a huge amount of novelty, and being in a relationship is there's a very small amount of novelty. People do things to try and increase it, role plays, new, whatever. But it may take some time, as you were saying, to be okay with yourself and to take a break from that, because that's a kind of an entrenched behavior pattern that trains your brain and your reproductive drives to.
That's really my message. I mean, that's one of the big dangers I see of the current. There's a lot of advantages to the way people date today, with the ability to kind of almost use the artificial intelligence of some website to target you to some people that you would have something in common with, and you don't have to go to the bar and spend, $50 on drinks and to try to maybe meet somebody that you might like sober. I mean, you don't have to do that anymore, really. Yet the accessibility of many partners is so it's so in your face that a lot of people are really just running through people. And my message would be just like, caution. There are some natural consequences associated with this, not a judgment, but just, you are an organism that was made to behave in certain ways. And imagine yourself on the savannas of Africa. You might have only been exposed to a couple of partners in your lifetime or whatever. And, we're doing things to ourselves that we weren't bred to do. And that does take its toll, in my opinion.
Oh, I think it goes back to the idea of these supernormal stimuli, right? They're things that in nature, like the Big Mac, you have unlimited access to this thing that is, what is a Big Mac, like 700 calories or some ridiculous thing. Who isn't going to overdo it from time to time on a Big Mac? And some people may get caught in that net where they eat 4 Big Macs, or they eat, 8 Big Macs a week, and it's really bad for them, and they end up gaining a huge amount of weight because it's something that, as you said, we aren't bred to have. On the African savannas, when we were coming up as a species, there were no Big Macs. One of the skills that you didn't have to be successful was resisting the urge to eat 10 Big Macs. If you were on the savannah and you encountered 10 Big Macs, well, you better eat as many as you possibly can. Get it while the getting's good.
Sure.
And I think the same goes with reproductive behavior.
Right. And the other caution I would throw out as we move into maybe sort of an act, what can people do, or how can people kind of reconsider the situations they're in? But the other caution I have for people is that when we're doing these dating relationships, these volatile ones where we're really sort of punishing ourselves and the other person, it's just that. We're punishing ourselves and the other person. We're working out things on our own insides that honestly, I'm not sure it's really super ethical to do to somebody. Like, I'm in pain and I'm super angry at women, and so I'm going to go do 4 of them in 2 days and never call any of them, and that's mean. Like, that's really mean. That's not nice. It's unkind to them and you. And I know everybody's got an angle, but people lie, and people lie, get what they want, and use people and abuse them, and it's not a pretty sight in a lot of cases. So, but anyway, let's take some of these kinds of relationships we've talked about. Maybe first and foremost, the unhealthy, addictive kind of volatile one we've discussed. If you're caught in that cycle right now, What would be, Kate and Ian, what would be your advice to somebody? Let's start with you, Kate. What would be some steps to break that cycle? I'm Dr. Martin Carpenter, and this is the Heartache Connoisseur Podcast. Find us on social media or at our website, theheartacheconnoisseur.com. We'll pick it up next time with some practical advice for how to deal with some of the relationship difficulties we've outlined in the first 2 episodes. We hope you tune in for episode 3 of the Heartache Connoisseur. Thanks for listening.